where do the reports come from? Did you get an initial?
One PodVader.
That's football.
Every angle of the NFL covered.
All that kind of stuff, I get it.
This,
no question about it,
is Next Fan Up.
We're going to unleash hell here in December.
Hello and welcome to another wonderful edition of the Next Fan Up podcast. Today we are previewing the NFC West. If you've missed any of these wonderful division previews, well, hey, it's a podcast. Our archives are available anywhere great podcasts are heard. Apple, Spotify, Google, Pandora. Just jump into the archives and check out whichever division that you may have missed. I am PodVader. I am joined here today by the one and only Eagles superfan, James. Hello, James.
Hey, Pod. You know, it's great going through all these divisional previews with you, and hopefully there will be a season in the fall, but fingers crossed.
And we're also joined by our chief superfan, Nick. Hello, Nick.
How's it going, gentlemen?
Oh, it's going. As you guys know, we've been doing these game-by-game predictions. These are my game-by-game predictions. The guys are chiming in with their thoughts on each of these teams, giving you sort of a season preview of what's to come. The idea here is, yes, it's way too early to be doing game-by-game predictions. I have no idea what these teams are even going to look like. Obviously, the week 16 in December, there's probably going to be a whole bunch of injuries, and there's going to be all sorts of different factors that will change this. But it's a good exercise to go through because it gives you an idea of how you are perceiving the upcoming NFL season and where the strengths of these teams may or may not lie. If you've missed any of them, obviously you can check them out on any of the different listening platforms. Email us, nextfanup@gmail.com, at NFU Podcast, facebook.com/NFU Podcast to continue the conversation. Maybe you have some thoughts and ideas that we haven't expressed moving forward. Today we are talking about the NFC West. And I think, gentlemen, spoiler alert, if you haven't listened to any of the other division previews or we haven't finished the other division previews, record-wise, I think this is the best division in football. Yeah. But based on my game-by-game predictions, this is your winningest division in football.
I can see how you could say that because of two teams in particular, and the other two, coin flip at best.
All four teams have tied. My top two teams in this division have tied, and my bottom two teams in the division have tied. So let's start with the one that's getting a lot of buzz. A lot of people are saying could possibly be a playoff team this season. They're excited for the future of this team, and that is the Arizona Cardinals. I have them finishing the season at 7-9, so just under 500, but I have no lock victories and no lock losses for this particular team. I mean, to me, they are an enigma wrapped in a riddle that's got a joke on the side. I really don't know where to place the Cardinals, but obviously the one area where they probably had one of their biggest questions, Bill O'Brien decided to give them a gift and gave them Nuke Johnson.
Just Merry Christmas. Here's arguably the best wide receiver in the league. No, my franchise quarterback doesn't need him. Have fun. And pair him
Nuke
with
Hopkins, by the way.
Larry.
Why did I say Johnson? My goodness. I'm terrible.
And pair him with, obviously, Hall of Fame bound Larry Fitzgerald.
Oh, and don't forget Christian Kirk, who was on his way to having a pretty decent season last year. Definitely, his arrow is still pointing up. Oh, and Andy Isabella, a nice little slot. I mean, they've got weapons.
They've got weapons.
I think the biggest question mark with them was the thing that was really slowing them down last year, which is their offensive line. And granted, they made a lot of moves to address it this offseason, but some of those, like their first round pick, they're rookies, and I think it's totally rebuilding an offensive line is tough to do fast. In fact, it's almost impossible. And so I think it's going to be probably a work in progress this year. But if they can get it clicking by mid-year, then absolutely I could see the Cardinals as being a team that go on some sort of a late season run and are sort of the Cinderella team going into the playoffs because, I think Kyler Murray exceeded, despite being the first overall pick last year, I still think he kind of exceeded expectations in terms of his performance, just given what was around him. And Cliff Kingsbury's playbook was really hampered by the fact that he could never protect him, and they were doing a ton of shotgun stuff and just, he was running for his life, but still they were not a dumpster fire. They were a competent team on the field. And so suddenly if protection is not a glaring issue, that opens up the playbook. And I think Kyler in his second year could really be, who knows? It seems crazy to say, but then we've just seen two quarterbacks in their second year go an MVP season. I think there's nothing stopping Kyler from having that if the protection holds up.
Kenyon Drake was a running back that they got late in the season last year who obviously performed much better in Arizona than he did in Miami. Chase Edmonds is there. They drafted Benjamin in the 7th round, which many think could be a steal, getting him so late. He could be a strong contributor to the run game. They get Max Williams, the always much heralded Max Williams, who really hasn't done much in the league at the tight end position. But like we said, the strength of this offense is going to be Kyler Murray and those wide receivers. They got wide receivers on wide receivers. And we'll see how the offensive line does. On the defensive side of the ball, James, their defense doesn't often get a lot of credit for just how good it is because they lose so many games. But they have strength. Chandler Jones, I believe, was your sack champion once again last season.
Yeah,
if he wasn't, he was right there.
And I think the defense thrived off the fact that once the offense found a rhythm, teams basically were in shootouts with this team. So the defense benefited from a lot of teams feeling they had to score just in case Arizona scored again or, often early. So that makes it easier for the front four, allowing them to just flat out rush the passer, which they did pretty well last year consistently. Probably the issues I have is the back seven of the defense, linebackers and defensive backs. But again, like I said, if the front four gets pressure, you can force errant throws, tip batted balls, timely hits on a wide receiver, pretty much get into a spot at the same time a defender and the ball arrives and anything can happen. The secondary, though,
this is, by the way, one of the first times I've ever seen on our lads a player listed at 2 positions in the depth chart, and that's Isaiah Simmons. Their first round can play any position on the defense player.
Yeah, and my concern here with the defense is more so just I don't know if there's enough youth and experience on this defense. And Patrick Peterson is getting up in age. Budda Baker made a name for himself last year with timely hits, good stops. Looked to be somewhat of a ball hawk, stripping the ball and forcing fumbles. Had a few interceptions. And those are the two guys for me that stand out here. Like I said, if they can gel a little bit better than what they did last year, this could be one of the better secondaries in the league. Not the best, but definitely top 10.
Nick, you got more thoughts here on the Cardinals and their defense?
Not too much. Other than I just, it'll be interesting to see how they use Simmons. That's kind of what everybody says come out of, looking at the Cardinals defense, because I don't know that they have lockdown guys at their other corner spots where you can totally unleash him to do whatever. But, the best use for him is to be a Derwin James, where you're going to be blitzing with him. You're going to be using him as a linebacker, a safety, kind of going everywhere. And in the division, I'm not sure there's so many of the kind of, there's not like, I guess other than Kittle, there's not like a tight end you need to be able to neutralize with this guy. It's more of how can he fit into some scheme stuff and on a game plan by game plan basis give you an edge and kind of playing like with 12 men out there. That's just going to be really fun to watch. And it's just going to be a question of whether or not they're going to have the creativity to unlock that.
So the other team I have at 7-9, and again, I will say they're an enigma wrapped in a riddle with a joke on the side, are the Los Angeles Rams. I I do have 2 lock losses for the Rams, and that is week 3 at the Bills and week 11 at the Buccaneers. But every other game I see is a 50-50 game. And quite honestly, I mean, you went from a Super Bowl loser to a losing season after you've been crowned as like the head coach of the future. And this is really where you're going to make your bones.
Yeah, my biggest issue for this team has to deal with the guy under center and Jared Goff. They got rid of their best player on offense pretty much just to make way for the contract negotiations and or the big contract that Goff either has gotten or will get. And I can't remember if he's already gotten it or not. Correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yes.
But
cap number's like $38 million or something this year.
All right. And you get rid of Todd Gurley. For what? I mean, you poorly handled his injury at the end of the Super Bowl year. I don't think he really got completely healthy last season, and it wasn't managed properly to the point to where you gave up on him by week 6. Then pretty much when the offseason starts, you trade him to the Atlanta Falcons. Good for the Falcons, but the guys behind Gurley, outside of Malcolm Brown, leave much to be desired. I don't.
Well, they drafted Cam Akers.
Okay. Rookie running backs.
Rookie running backs do well.
They do well, but not often. I mean, look, we saw Josh Adams last year for the Raiders, who we've previously talked about. But, I mean, for this offense, running back is key for the way they run this offense. Everything can't be on Goff and this receiving core. Don't get me wrong. It's a solid receiving core with Kupp, Woods, Reynolds, Tyler Higbee at tight end. But you need that ground game going because a lot of what they do in the passing game is predicated on play action, off the stretch run, which is their staple running play. They don't have that anymore. And those intermediate passing routes that, those 10 to 15-yard routes, ends and digs over the middle that this receiving core makes a living at, they don't hold up much unless the linebacking core is sucked up because they're expecting to run. With no threat of Todd Gurley, they can sag back, probably tip some balls, allow the defense to get some interceptions.
And not only that, not only are they not going to be threatening as much with the running game potentially, but they don't have a deep threat anymore. They've cycled through various deep threat receivers. They had Sammy Watkins for whatever the 1 year they had him, and then they had Brandon Cooks. And not both guys didn't get targeted a ton, in part because Goff's deep accuracy isn't great. But at the very least, it just created space for, the other guys, for Kupp, and Robert Woods, and for those guys to do their work and for the scheme to work. And now I just don't know where that vertical threat is going to appear here. And alongside that, you have your offensive line is falling apart. And it's like the reverse Drew Lock, as we were talking about before with the AFC West a day ago, whenever it's going to post, whereas if you're going to have a young quarterback you're not entirely sure of, the big thing you need is at least protection. And I'm not sure Goff is going to have that when he's been pressured a lot in games. That's when he's had his worst crumbling performances. And I'm not sure that they necessarily have all the tools in the tool bag to make McVay's system work right now.
It is definitely an aging offensive line, but if healthy, is a solid offensive line. I agree that the loss of Brandon Cooks will have a bigger impact than I think they realize. They did draft Van Jefferson in the second round, whom I'm very high on, but again, he's a rookie wide receiver. I don't necessarily expect a lot out of him. If they do move Cooper out of the slot to the outside, yes, technically he can play it, but I would compare that to Julian Edelman on my team, a guy who, yes, he can technically play the outside, but he is much more effective and much better in the slot than he is on the outside. I think the same can be said about Cooper Kupp. All right, so that's the offensive side of the LA Rams. Let's talk about their defense. They have the best defensive player in the league in Aaron Donald, who can basically play any of the any of the line positions. And quite frankly, if you've seen pictures of him during this off season, frankly, I think he could play any linebacker position he wanted to as well. The dude is jacked. He's just a freak of an athlete. Michael Brockers, as a rusher, their linebackers are underrated, but I also think that they actually perform better than what they are rated at. And Micah Kaiser and Samson Abukum, especially Abukum. I don't think he gets enough credit for how well he actually plays. But they have issues elsewhere. And Jalen Ramsey added to the secondary certainly helps a secondary without any other name.
Yeah, he still wants an extension because he wants to be the highest paid corner in the league. Don't know how that's going to play out. But as you said, outside of Ramsey, the rest of the secondary, I don't want to say they're just guys, but they're not good enough to consistently scare opposing offenses. You got Johnson and Rapp at the safeties, Hill opposite of Ramsey, Darius Williams, David Long Jr. figure in the mix for corner. I like that they added Leonard Floyd from Chicago to help out in the front seven, but the issue I have with this defense is pretty much been their weakness the last several years, in that they can't stop anybody who commits to the run. And they have two teams in the division who last year were top 3, if not top 5, in rushing offense. And if you commit to running the ball down their throats, even with the best defensive player on the team, and this is pretty much my only knock on Aaron Donald, he disappears in run game. Passing, he throws up all the pretty stats that, catches everyone's attention and creates, highlights and everything. But in the run game, he can be swallowed up. And if you can commit to running the ball, you can handle this defense.
Yeah, I actually think PFF apparently loves their corners. I'm just looking at their ratings here.
You immediately hate their corners.
No, I'm just saying, I think it's just sort of interesting. PFF has, because I also don't recognize these names, but they have 4 of their corners all have a grade of 70 or above, actually 71 and above. They just looking though at their D line. I actually think a lot of what I agree with a lot of what James is saying, that their weaknesses against the run, but you just look at that line, man. It's Aaron Donald, who somebody else was pointing out a stat where in terms of the amount of pressures he's regularly putting up, there's no other 2 players on the interior in the league that put up as much pressures as him. So he's regularly generating as much pressure as any 2 defensive linemen in the league. They also have Arshawn Robinson, Michael Brockers, and now Floyd on the edge with Ebicom. They should be able to just destroy every opposing offensive line, but sometimes some of those guys that are rushing a bunch are not necessarily the best run defenders. The issue there is just simply that their offense has to be able to keep it moving. You can get run on all you want as long as your offense isn't going 3 and out. So I think that's going to be the side of the ball that's really going to decide things. I think the defense is going to be able to hold its own. It's just a question of if Goff is going to be able to keep from sputtering.
By the way, one position that we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about in any of these previews is special teams. It was brought up because I think Buffalo Rob brought it up, but I did fail to talk about the Patriots kicking position because they have a brand new rookie kicker, and so will the Los Angeles Rams. They drafted Sam Sloman in the 7th round. They have a couple of other guys, undrafted free agents, but they'll have a new kicker going with Johnny Hecker as their punter. So another issue for the Rams to face.
I will just say, on that, it seems like a really small note, but generally situations like that, where you have a kicker competition, that gets resolved in training camp. And if we have an abridged or not really much of a training camp or preseason at all, that actually is a difficult roster decision to deal with, because you haven't seen enough these guys make enough kicks, and you don't want to go into the season with 3 kickers on your 53-man roster. So you're just going to have to guess pretty much.
So the next 2 teams are playoff bound teams in this division, based on my game by game predictions, and they finished tied. The tiebreaker actually ends up being head to head. And so the team that will take the wild card in the NFC West will be my former boyfriends, the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I say former because they were my boyfriends last season. And normally I like to pick a new boyfriend team for every season. And while, spoiler alert, if you haven't heard the NFC South, people are going to say the Buccaneers are my boyfriends this season. And that probably is kind of true. I am not officially declaring a boyfriend team for this year because, frankly, my husbands need all the love I can give them this year.
Yes.
So the 49ers, I've got taking the wild card. And again, it's a head-to-head. They lose the head-to-head matchup against the Seahawks. Both teams will finish 12-4. So let's talk about the team that lost the Super Bowl, the San Francisco 49ers. I actually see them starting off hot. I do only have them winning only one game. Like, I only have one lock game, and that is against the Dolphins in week 5. They'll be hosting the Dolphins in San Francisco. All the other games I see as sort of 50-50 games. But the 49ers here, I think right now their biggest concern is just how fast can Deebo Samuel recover from a terrible injury for any wide receiver. Just ask AJ Green.
Yeah, and that's going to be key considering you lose Deebo Samuel, you trade another wide receiver to Philadelphia. This is going to be telling as far as how this core shakes out with Garoppolo if and when the season starts, because they depend on running the ball. And in those situations where they do throw, these guys are very important. And Kittle sometimes in these passing schemes stays in the block, and he's a safety valve outlet. So how well Garoppolo, for whatever preseason training camp we have, bonds with the remaining receiving core will pretty much tell how far this team will go.
Well, they do have a fairly strong core of, I would say, good, not great wide receivers in Kendrick Bourne, Dante Pettis, and then the rookie who was probably having a better season last year before he got hurt, Jalen Hurd. I think Jalen Hurd was actually, his era was way higher than Deebo Samuel's was at the beginning of the season last year, and then unfortunately got hurt. But I think Jalen Hurd is sort of like the guy that people don't talk about because they also drafted Brandon Ayuk in the first round. Again, how much you can trust a rookie wide receiver, but basically Jalen Hurd is going to be a rookie wide receiver, and Kendrick Bourne and Dante Pettis are good, not great wide receivers. So, a lot of their passing game is going to be around, obviously, one of the best tight ends in the league in George Kittle. I will give you the benefit of just saying one of the best, Nick. I won't say the best.
Hey. There's also that guy in Philly. Don't just cater to Nick.
Sure. But their running back core, they bring back all the same guys. Much like the Kansas City Chiefs, they bring back a heck of a lot of starters, and they improve their offensive line with Trent Williams. So I do like the way that the San Francisco 49ers are moving. It really is just a matter of Deebo Samuel's injury. Can he recover from a foot injury that keeps a lot of wide receivers off the field for quite a bit of time? And even when they do come back, they tend not to have that same speed, cut, burst.
Well, and even with him back, I think he gets most often compared to Anquan Bolden, although they do a lot more gadgety stuff with him too. But just in terms of body type and play style. And so, he's your possession guy. He's a fight for yardage guy. He's not, kind of similar to with the Rams. He's not the vertical threat. And I'm not sure they have one unless Ayuk really develops fairly quickly, because Emmanuel Sanders, he was a great trade for them mid-season last year to bring him in. He instantly gave them that next gear in the defense, although they didn't, shoot for it a ton. But as James mentioned, when they do take shots, frequently they're keeping Kittle in to block, like in the Super Bowl on the 3rd and 10 and then the 4th and 10, where they critically needed to keep the ball moving to stay alive in that game. And I think it was their second to last possession. Kittle was blocking both times. Like, you don't want your best pass catcher blocking on big third and fourth down plays. And, I don't know. It'll be interesting. I trust that Kyle Shanahan can continue to manufacture offense. It's just a question of, can they make it work without the guy, taking the top off? Because, your good but not great guys are going to be fine if you can scheme them open. But, you got to be able to do that consistently. So, we'll see. But, they've done some nice things on defense as well.
Yeah, their defense is again going to be quite strong when you have Nick Bosa on one side, Eric Armstead on the other, maybe Dee Ford coming in, rotating through, Solomon Thomas in the middle. They drafted Javon Kinlaw in the first round to help out there in the middle. Your linebackers, Kwan Alexander, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, all solid. Their safeties, Jaquiski Tart, Jimmy Ward, again, a solid secondary. Their corners is where they have the question mark. And of course, it's all about old man Richard Sherman. And I say that fearing that Richard Sherman will get angry. But frankly, I want angry Richard Sherman if I'm the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, and he tends to play better when he has something to prove. My concern here, again, his age, much like Peterson in Arizona. And much like Peterson in Arizona, opposite him, not much confidence. I mean, they had a revolving door opposite Richard Sherman last year. I believe Witherspoon started the season, then Mosley took over in the middle, and he lost the job back to Witherspoon again by the time they made the Super Bowl run. They got to find consistency opposite of Sherman. To say that, you have, three consistent corners or three guys who any given Sunday can play at the top of their game is great, but you need at least two of these guys, three of them consistently to play the same week in and week out, and we can only count on one of them. That means the other side of the field is getting picked on a lot. That's typically what happened to this defense last year when teams had success. They just went opposite Sherman, figured out who was over there, and was like, yeah, that's the guy who's struggling. That's what we're going after.
And that's the main reason why I have them as only one lock victory. In that one lock, though, I do have them starting the season 7-0, and then finally, week 8, a big divisional matchup against the Seahawks in Seattle, being where I see their first stumble. So let's talk about the team that I have as the division winners, the Seattle Seahawks. And this team, I have a little bit more confidence than the 49ers, but obviously I have them finishing with the same record. So there's that aspect, but I do have them as 4 lock victories. Week 2, hosting the Patriots, week 4 at the Dolphins, week 13 hosting the Giants, and then week 14 hosting the Jets. Every other game I see is a 50-50 game. And actually I do see them, they're not the greatest away team. And so week 1 away at the Falcons is sort of they'll stumble out of the gate, but then regain, their uprightness, pretty quickly. But the Seattle Seahawks, I think, are a team that a lot of people like as perhaps a Super Bowl contender, Nick.
Absolutely. I mean, I think they have easily a top 3 quarterback and plenty of wide receiver talent. And they have some holes on their defense, but overall it's a very solid roster. And you'd think generally well coached, although I do think that they have a coach that frequently gets in his own way in Super Bowls at times. And I think that's just going to be the continuing question mark is if they can just open up this offense and allow Russ to just throw it to some of the really good wide receivers like Tyler Lockett and DK, who's now come on and going to be presumably even better in his second year, then I think the sky's the limit for them within their conference, certainly.
As I'm looking at the R-Lads depth chart, James, their offensive line is Dwayne Brown at left tackle, Ethan Pocic at left guard with Mike Ayupati backing him up, BJ Finney at center, Phil Haynes at right guard, and Cedric Ogbuehi at right tackle. It does seem like they still haven't quite figured out the offensive line here.
I don't think they ever will figure it out. It seems like that 2-year Super Bowl run they had was pretty much the best offensive line in the history of this franchise, and they haven't even come close to recreating that in any way, shape, or form, which typically means Russell Wilson is running for his life, or like last year, they're tops in the league in rushing, leaning on the running backs and Wilson running for his life, as previously mentioned. This is definitely an issue. They've got to get shored up. They thought they did by trading with the Texans to acquire Dwayne Brown, but I mean, that's just one guy, and the rest of these guys haven't really stepped up to do anything. You did mention the schedule, which I double-checked. They have 4 1:00 starts in the Eastern time zone. You already mentioned the Falcons, but also include, the Bills, the Washington team, and I'm missing one here, the Dolphins. That doesn't bode well for them. I think that's as much as they've had in the last couple of years. So the schedule makers didn't like them, West Coast team going east, playing at 1:00, which is 9 a.m. for them. Their internal clocks may be messed up if things play out normally for the regular season.
They have a ton of depth at the tight end position. Greg Olsen was recently acquired. They have Luke Wilson, Will Dissly, Colby Parkinson drafted in the 4th round, Steven Sullivan drafted in the 7th round, Jacob Hollister, whom had a pretty decent season for them last year when all of their tight ends were hurt. So they have a ton of depth at tight end. All those guys aren't going to remain on the team. And their running back room got a little bit more deep with Carlos Hyde coming to the team to back up Chris Carson, Rashad Penny still there, and sneaky 4th round draft choice DJ Dallas. Don't be surprised if you see him step up as a contributor for this team.
Yeah, I think this is a room that Carlos Hyde can take over. Carson and Penny have injury issues, and sometimes consistency as far as regularity in their production. And Carlos Hyde coming over from Houston as well. I don't see how he doesn't take this job by, say, week 4 of the season.
Yeah, I would just say from a fantasy perspective, it's the issue there in predicting that is just that Seattle's sort of like New England in that it's just totally random who's going to get the touches every week. They tend to like to just spread it around for whatever reason and keep a really deep stable there. So, I think Hyde probably is the best of those dudes, although we'll see with the rookie. But I'm not sure they're going to commit to giving anybody more than 15 touches there.
Moving to the defensive side of the ball, this is definitely not your Legion of Boom. The secondary, your starters looks like Shaq Griffin, Trey Flowers, maybe Ugo Amadi, Quentin Dunbar from Washington.
Who is in some legal trouble.
Is your corners, your safeties, Brad McDougall and Quandre Diggs. Their secondary is definitely weak. Their linebackers, they drafted Jordan Brooks in the 1st round. They have Bruce Irvin, who plays the Leo, Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright. So, and don't forget Shaquille Griffin's brother, Shaquem Griffin, whom they love. There's something to work with on the linebacking side. The corners and the secondary, not so much.
I actually like their safeties in Blair and Quandre Diggs and Bradley McDougall's shown some stuff too. They're all kind of young. And so, they tried to rebuild the Legion of Boom and, it wasn't going to all work in a 1-year project, but I think they were top half of the league in defense the last couple of years, despite all of the changes they're doing. Bobby Wagner he's one of those few 3-down linebackers in this league that can do a lot from his one spot. The question for me is just where is the pass rush going to come from? They traded away Frank Clark. They drafted LJ Collier that same year. He didn't really show anything, and they're just hoping to piece together some pressures here and there from some other guys they've drafted over the year, like, Rasheem Green and, and I guess, Bruce Irvin, they're going to give him a situational pass rusher role this time around too. But that's going to be their real struggle.
I mean, you have to sign
be
Jadeveon
there.
Clowney, right?
You have to, but then in the second round, they drafted Darrell Taylor out of Tennessee. So do they really want to? And from all accounts, the number that Clowney's asking for is deemed too high by a lot of franchises because, as you mentioned earlier with another team, we don't know what the salary cap's going to look like for this season.
Yeah. The future of the salary cap is really where a lot of the questions are going to lie for a lot of these teams and how that will be managed, because there's plenty of teams that have been managing their salary cap with the idea that it will increase as the years move forward. If it does not increase next season, and if it in fact decreases because there's no revenue or less revenue, then that is going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of teams in the league, not just the Seattle Seahawks. So I have the Seahawks winning this division. They beat the 49ers. They actually sweep the 49ers, which is how they end up winning the division, but with a tied record. And then the 49ers will get one of the 3 wildcard spots here. The Rams and the Cardinals both at 7-9. So, I mean, a couple of different games go their way. Maybe they steal a wildcard spot as well. But the NFC West, I think, is strong. And I think they're strong not only because they have good teams and good players, but they also are facing a weak AFC East division. It's hard to say when one of the weak teams is your own, and it hasn't been for 20 years. But
come on. 98 Cleveland Browns.
That's going to do it for our NFC West division preview. How'd we do? Let us know. nextfanup@gmail.com, at NFU Podcast on Twitter, facebook.com/NFU Podcast to keep the conversation going. If you just found us by searching us and you're listening to this, hey, thanks for listening. Check out some of our other episodes and some of our other previews. Anywhere great podcasts are heard: Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Pandora. We're huge on Pandora. I don't know why we're huge on Pandora, but hey, I love the fact that we're huge somewhere. So go and check us out wherever you like to listen to your podcast, and tell a friend to come listen to us too. We like to present the perspective of 32-ish fans of every team, because quite honestly, you can get one perspective from your super fan, you're going to get another perspective from your rival super fan, and you'll get yet another perspective from a super fan who has absolutely no skin in the game on your particular team, which is why we continue to do the show in a roundtable format like we do. Hey, what do you know? Almost as if I planned it that way. Thanks to Nick and James for joining me on this particular episode, and we will talk to you again next time. Until then, there you have it.
How you doing?
How are you, buddy?
Trying to figure out who's going to play?
Yeah.
So are we.